I go out and I collect eels, I count eels, I release them, take some measurements of them, and I do it when they're really, really little, like this, really tiny. They're called glass eels when they're really little. And I do it when they're really, really big. I've seen an eel even bigger than this before. And I involve community members in my scientific research. So I go out and I sample for eels, and I know a lot about eels, but I also want to teach about eels to other people because I love them so much. So part of my job, a main part of my job, is that I bring other people from the community with me to sample for eels. And sampling means just going, collecting them, looking at them, making some observations, and then letting them go, because we always want to let wild things go, right? We use them a little bit for science to get a better understanding of them, then we let them go. And so today I have 2 eel books that we're going to read that I'm very excited about. They're 2 of my favorite books. And I have a little matching game for us to play in the middle of the 2 books, where we're going to match what eels eat at different ages. So when eels are different ages, they look totally different. When they're little babies, and then when they're teenagers, and then when they're adults, they look totally different, and they all actually have a different name. So today we're going to talk about what all those different names are, and we're going to talk about what they eat at all those different names, because it's totally different. They're not eating the same thing their whole life like humans do. So let's get started with our first book. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It's called Think of an Eel. There's a beautiful eel on the cover right there. Get a little closer so you guys can see. So, think of an eel. Think of an eel. She swims like a fish. She slides like a snake. Wait, are eels snakes or are they fish? They're fish. They look like a snake, but a snake is a reptile, right? They look like a snake, but they're actually a fish because they have fins like this. All fish have fins. They have scales, which you can't see on an eel. They're super, super, super tiny, but eels have scales because they're a fish. And they have a really special organ called gills, which help them breathe underwater. We use our lungs to breathe, right? Take a breath, breathe out. We use our lungs to get oxygen and to breathe, but eels, because they're a fish, they use their gills. So they look like a snake, but they're actually a fish. There's a warm, weedy sea to the south of Bermuda. It's called the Sargasso. No wind ever blows there. No sailing ships sail there. For thousands of years, there a secret lay hidden. The salt, soupy sea is where eels are born. Deep down where it's blackest, eel egg becomes eel. So eels hatch from eggs. She looks like a willow leaf, clear as crystal. Her fierce-jutting mouth has teeth like a saw blade. She eats like a horse and swims up through the water. Baby eels are born in early spring. A real one is only about this big. You see next to my finger? So small, right? And when they're this little, it doesn't really look like an eel, right? This is a very, very baby eel, super tiny, just hatched out of an egg, and they're called Leptostep Fly. It's a really long word. Imagine this eel leaf and millions just like her swimming on waves across the wide sea. Some are unlucky. The seagulls are waiting. Beaks snap like scissors through the wriggling water. Young eels from the Sargasso travel either to Europe or America, whichever their parents did before them. Eel swims for a whole year till she reaches the shore, but the river's too cold. There's still snow on the mountains. So she waits in the water, turns into an Elvert. Now she looks like shoelace made of glass. Eels arrive in the Hudson in February. Once they're in the Hudson, they turn into Elverts. But first, they're these totally see-through glass eels. When you hold a glass eel in your hands, you can only see their black spines and you can see their hearts beating and their little eyes. That's all you can see. Their whole bodies are clear. And then they start eating things in the Hudson, and they start gaining pigment, and that's when they become elvers. When spring warms the shore, the smell of fresh water excites the glass eel. Into the river, she swims like a mad thing. She wriggles up rapids, climbs rocks around waterfalls. Riverbanks guide her. Nothing will stop her. Eels navigate by instinct. They always seem to know where they are going. So these are still the glass eels. They come into the Hudson, and they swim up waterfalls and rapids to try and get as far upstream as they can. Around a drowned oak stump, through twisting green weeds, a mud hole is hidden. Eel knows without thinking that's what she's been seeking. She slips through the ooze. This hole is her home. Mud holes, burrows, and cracks in the riverbed are all homes for eels. Look how big she got. She got so big, right? Think of an eel. After years in the river, she's slit-eyed and slimy and thick like a snake. She gulps down stickleback eggs, eats shrimp and small fishes. If the river is empty, she swims from the mud hole, slips through the grass to steal snails from the pond. Eels feed mostly at night. The eel can live out of water for 2 days or longer if the ground is wet, breathing through its slimy skin. There she is coming out of the water. Go back into the water. One day, Eel stops eating. Her stomach is shrinking. Her long, winding body turns silver and black. Eyes like black currants bulge into headlights. Look how big her eyes get. Now for the last time, Eel slides from the mud hole. Her years in the river are over forever. Silver eel waits for a night that is moonless, when the rain from the mountains has flooded the stream. Then she slips down the river, down to the seashore. The time has arrived for her long journey home. Silver eels usually leave the river in September or October. While they're waiting for a dark night, sometimes they get tangled up in a ball. That's a lot of eels, right? For many days, silver eel swims through the ocean, squirms like a secret from a seabird and sailor. There are millions just like her, deep down in the water, swimming silently back to the Sargasso Sea. Eels have big eyes for seeing in the dark. And eel cradle in the weedy Sargasso. After many days swimming, not eating, not sleeping, Eel's long, winding body is worn out, wasted. She spills the new life carried deep in her belly, then sinks through the sea like a used silver wrapper. So she lays all her eggs and then she dies. Her life is over. She did her job. Made it back to the ocean, laid all her eggs. Deep down where it's blackest, eel egg becomes eel. That's where we started, right? With the eel egg hatching into an eel. He looks just like a willow leaf, clear as crystal. Her fierce jutting mouth has teeth like a saw blade. He eats like a horse and swims up through the water. Imagine this eel leaf and millions just like him swimming on waves across the wide sea. Look at that mouth. And that's the end. That's the eel life cycle, the eel story. What do you guys think? Are they interesting animals? I think they're pretty interesting. They have a really crazy life story where different points in their life, they're called totally different things, right? What are some names that we learned in that book? First, they start as an egg, right? And then they become a leptocephali, which that was a really long word that's hard to remember. Leptocephali. And then they become the glass eel, and then the elver, and then a yellow eel, and then a silver eel. So they have 6 different names that we call them by, depending on how old they are. And they look totally different at all of those ages, right? So I want to see if you guys can tell me what you think eels eat at these different ages. And I have some pictures on the board. We'll see if this works. See if I can hold it up and do a couple things at one time. So where do all eels start? What do they start as? As an egg, right? They're a little egg. Put our egg up.
If you're on, maybe you can unmute the kids if they want to give answers. Is that right, Aidan?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, you should be able to unmute them. Yeah, I see Brando just did. All right.
So as an egg, what do you think eggs eat? Do eggs eat anything?
No,
Probably not, right? They don't eat anything.
They don't eat it.
All of the nutrients that they need is stored inside the egg. So eels aren't eating anything when they're in the egg outside because they're getting it all from the inside. What was our next eel? Does anybody remember that super long word? It was a really hard one. Probably not. I'll tell you again. So this is our leptocephali. Can you guys all say that? Leptocephali. Yeah, nice job. Here's our leptocephali. And they're basically like a mouth attached to a spine. They don't have fins. They can't really swim. They're just floating along on the ocean currents to get where they need to go. And remember that picture I showed you? They were really tiny, right? They were only about this big. So do you think they can eat big things? Probably not, right? They can only eat things that are really, really small. But they eat something really special that's called marine snow.
Marine snow.
Isn't that interesting? So marine snow is basically like a bunch of skin cells floating around in the ocean. It's scales that fall off of fish. It's things that are decomposing. It's like little tiny bits of plants that are all floating around in the water. That's called marine snow. And the leptocephali gobble that up. They love that. They eat so much of it. Doesn't sound very tasty to me. I don't think I'd like to eat little bits of things floating around in the water, but the leptocephali, I like it, so. All right, our next eel is the one who's totally clear. And you can see their spine. Does anybody remember the name of that eel?
Glass eel.
Glass eel, yeah. So here's our glass eel. Still really small, but starting to look more like an eel. The glass eels can start to eat things that are a little bit bigger because they're living in the estuary, right? They're living in the river, so they're starting to eat things that live in the river. The leptocephali can only eat things in the ocean because that's where they live. But once they come into the river, they can start eating things that we have here. So they eat something called macroinvertebrates, which are just like bugs that live underneath rocks in the river. If you go down to the river and you pick up pretty much any rock and look on the bottom, you'll probably see a bunch of things moving around. Those are all macroinvertebrates, and that is a glass eel's favorite snack. That's what they like to eat. But once they start eating, they start getting color, right? And they become Elvert. So they're a little bit bigger. They start to get more fins. They're swimming around. And since the elvers are bigger, they can start to get more bigger too. So they still eat macroinvertebrates like the glass eels do. They can also eat things that are a little bit bigger, like crayfish, or even, what is that a picture of? Glass
Lobsters or crabs? Lobsters?
Yeah, this is a crayfish. So they're similar to crabs. They look almost like a lobster, but they're pretty small and they live in the river. And the Elvers really like to eat them. And the Elvers like to eat glass eels too.
Wait, eels eat other eels?
Eels do eat other eels. Isn't that crazy?
Mm-hmm.
They really like to do that. And that's how they get really, really big. So look how big there's our Elvert. Look how big the yellow eel is compared to the Elvert. That's because they eat so much and they're eating, they eat really, really big things. There's our yellow eel. So they'll still eat these things too. They'll eat other eels, they'll eat crayfish, they'll eat probably some macroinvertebrates, but not the small ones because that might not be worth it for them. But they add a new thing to their diet when they get that big, which is bigger fish. And who's that other picture of?
Frog.
Frogs, yeah. Yellow eels love frogs.
How do they get frogs? Frogs are not deep down in the ocean or the river.
So these eels, they're not in the ocean. These eels are still in the river. And you can find frogs in the river as well. So
I mean,
they're living in the river, and they're also living in creeks and streams that run into the river, where you can find a lot of frogs there, right?
yeah, but how do the eels eat them? Because the frogs are always at the top, not the bottom.
Eels are at the bottom too. So
No,
they
but how?
go at the bottom and they catch them, and they use their big mouth to catch them.
No, but the frogs are at the top. Like, you know how like on the lily pads?
I got you. I see. Yeah.
But the eels are down there. How do the eels get up to
They can swim up at the top too. They don't stay totally at the bottom. That's where they like to live. But if they're hungry and they need a snack and they see a frog moving at the top of the surface, they can swim up and eat the frog and then come back down.
Okay.
That's a good question. All right, so the yellow eels, their whole job is to get really, really big, right? They get massive. I'll show you how big they can get. So this is how big a yellow eel can get if it's a boy. This big, which is pretty big, right? It's a pretty big eel, pretty big fish. But this is how big an eel can get if it's gonna be a girl. Look how long that is. She doesn't even fit on the screen. She's so big. And that's because she has a really, really important job that takes a lot of energy. She has to lay all of the eggs, which takes a lot of energy. She can hold up to 20 million eggs inside of her.
20 million?
20 million. That's a number I can't even think about how many that is. Like I can't even think about it in my head. She can fit 20 million inside of her body. And that's why she has to be so big, because even though eel eggs are super, super, super tiny, 20 million is a lot. So she has to fit them all inside of her, and it takes a lot of energy to make those 20 million eggs. So that's why she gets so big, and he only gets to be this big. So that brings me to my next important last life cycle. So the yellow eels, their whole job is to get really, really big, right? To be growing, eating. And then what happens? What happened to the silver eel? What did she do before she went back to the ocean? Anybody remember? Ooh, Olympia, I see your hand raised on my side. Yeah.
Does she, before she goes back to the ocean, does she lay her eggs and then go back to the ocean?
That's a good guess. She lays her eggs in the ocean. That's why she's going back. But what happens to her body before she goes back to the ocean?
She dies?
She has to lay her eggs before she dies. But a couple things happen to her. She gets really, really dark. That's why they're called silver eels, right? And her eye gets really, really big. Remember that? And
Yeah.
she stops eating. Remember?
Oh.
She stops eating. She says, no more food for me. And she makes that really long journey. So she stops eating too. And she makes a really long journey back to the Sargasso Sea. So I keep saying she because that's the pronoun that we used in the book for the eel. But the boy and the girl eels both go back to the Sargasso Sea. And then it starts all over again, right? The new eggs hatch into Leptostep Fly, who grow into glass eels. And glass eels are the ones that we first see in the river. These guys are in the ocean. When we first see glass eels in the river, they grow into Elvers. And then they get really big as yellow eels. And then they go silver, go back to the ocean, and it all starts over again every year. It's pretty cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that I don't have a life cycle like that, though. I don't like to swim thousands of miles to the ocean.
No.
It would take a long time. Do you guys have any questions for me before we read our next book about eels or what they eat or anything like that? No? Are we good for our next book?
Mm-hmm.
Wait. I totally forgot one thing. I brought an eel with me for you guys to meet. Do you want to meet an eel? A real eel?
Yes.
A live eel?
Yeah.
I was going to say, that didn't sound very excited. I don't know.
I do. Yeah.
All right, let's see. Take a look at this eel together. Does anybody remember what life stage this eel would be?
An elderly.
Almost, yeah, you're really close. I think it's right on the tip of your tongue. So they're not clear, right? So it's not a glass eel. And the next one is an Elvert. Okay. Well, this is our Elvert. And he's kind of hard to see on camera. He's kind of light colored. Usually he's a little darker, but he doesn't like to be in this container. And when eels get stressed out, sometimes they turn like lighter in color. There's our Elvert. You can see he's got a full belly. He ate a really big breakfast this morning.
What did he eat?
We feed them bloodworms.
Ooh.
Yeah, which are, here, I can actually show you. So if you look on our sheet, they are a macroinvertebrate, like that. They're much smaller than this. They look like, I can't even make them as small as they usually are. They're really, really tiny. And they're like little worms that live in the river. And you can buy them frozen in pet stores for fish to feed them as well. So we fed this eel some bloodworms. It's pretty cute, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna try and get out of the container. I'm gonna have full
Do you
belly.
ever take him out?
No, so he doesn't live in this container. He lives, I'm at an environmental center right now, and we have a bunch of really big fish tanks. And so he lives in a really big fish tank with a bunch of other eels. So he's not by himself, and he doesn't just live in this container. But if I'm gonna do a program like this and talk to people like you and look at eels or look at other fish that we have here, I'll pull them out, and then it's much easier to see them in a little container, and it's easier for my arm. I don't have to hold up a whole fish tank to show you. We can look at our eel.
Wait, but how do you take him out?
We use a net, a fishing net.
Can he breathe?
Sometimes it takes a
Can he
while.
not breathe?
Eels are really sneaky. They like to hide underneath rocks and under plants. And so we have about 15 of them in a tank. But if you look in there, most of the time you can't even see them because they're underneath a bunch of stuff. So when I have to pull out an eel to show people, like you guys on camera, or if I go into a classroom to show students an eel, sometimes it takes me a long time to be able to catch one because they're really good hiders.
Are there any red eels? Red eels?
Red eels, I've never seen a red eel, but sometimes when they're really big, the eels can actually be a bunch of different colors, but they're all kinds of shades of green or brown. But I've seen a lot of different variations or a lot of different kinds of eels when we catch them when they're really big. They all look really different, which is cool. It's not like a lot of other fish.
It's not like they're just the same.
Yeah, they're not just the same. So you can see where his head is, right? Because that's the direction that he's swimming in. It's kind of hard to see some other things on here. That's the direction he's swimming in. You can see his full belly. I wish he would calm down so you could see his gills. If you look close to his head, you can see a big red spot. Those are his gills that help him breathe. There's oxygenated blood in there, or blood that's full of oxygen, full of air, and that's how they breathe.
I made my own eel.
Do you guys have any eel questions for me before I put this eel back and we read our last book?
I have.
You have a question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
When the eels are just born, like when they're in the eggs, do they hatch like birds, or do they just like?
Go ahead, finish your question. I'm sorry.
So do they hatch like bird eggs, or do they just like break open and then they go free?
So most fish eggs are pretty soft.
Yeah.
So if you feel like, if you feel like a bird egg, usually they break into pieces, right? And they're really hard. But a fish egg or even a reptile egg are usually pretty soft. And reptile eggs are usually leathery. If you've ever seen like a turtle egg before, they don't break quite as much like a bird egg. I say that, but nobody has ever seen an eel hatch. No single person ever alive has ever seen an eel hatch out of an egg. So I can't really answer that question because nobody knows. So they go to the Sargasso Sea. That's the ocean where they lay all their eggs, right? So that's where the eggs also hatch. But nobody knows exactly where that is. We have an idea. We have like a thought of where we think it is. But no one has ever seen that happening in the wild. We don't know.
Wow.
And you can't get, you know how you can take, sometimes in classrooms, you can take chicken eggs and you can hatch them in an incubator. Sometimes a lot of classrooms do that. You can hatch them yourself and then see the chicks. You can't do that with eels. Eels, you can't get their eggs and hatch them in captivity. So captivity means like in a fish tank. You can't hatch them like that. So it's a mystery. Nobody really knows. That was a really good question.
But when that eel grows, will he lay eggs?
This one, so when this eel grows, we will let him go so that he can go out into the ocean if that's what he wants to do. And he'll go to the ocean, and how eels reproduce, which is how eels have babies, is they do something called spawning. So they release everything out into the water, and that's how the eggs hatch.
Wait, but so they don't have any parents? The eggs?
They don't. Remember, the silver eels die at the end. So every eel that starts its life, his parents are not alive anymore. But he'll do the same thing to his kids.
Oh.
It's very different from humans, right? Usually, pretty different. They live
I would
a
not
very
like
different
if I
life.
had that process. I would not like if I had that process.
Yeah, I don't think I would like it either. Also, it would take so long to swim there. It's over 1,000 miles away. I don't think I would like to swim 1,000 miles just to lay eggs and then die.
Probably take more than a year.
Yeah, it takes them a really long time. The glass eels takes them a year to make it to us, to swim from the Sargasso Sea to the Hudson River. It takes a year. And then for them, when they're fully grown silver adults, to swim back, that only takes them about a couple months because they're a lot bigger and a lot stronger swimmers.
Okay.
You've got good eel questions. You're thinking about it. Does anybody else have any eel questions? Or should I read another story?
How do you know if it's a boy or a girl?
That's a really good question. So I've been saying she and he, right? So it makes it sound like I know if it's going to be a boy or a girl. But actually, eels are not boys or girls until they're silver. So they're non-binary. They don't have a gender or a sex. They don't have male, female, boy, girl until they're silver. So it's almost the end of their life that happens. And so for the eels that are going to become girls, that happens when they're 30 years old, which that's even older than me. 30 years old, that's when that happens.
Wait.
And then for the eels that are going to become boy eels, that takes around 10 or 15 years, which is younger than me, but older than you guys. They're not boys or girls until they're fully grown, totally adults. That's a really good.
How old can eels live?
So the girl eels, they'll live to 30 years, and that's when they swim back to the Sargasso Sea, and they'll lay their eggs and they'll die.
What about the
And then
boys?
the boy eels, they live for either 10 or 15 years before they swim back to the Sargasso Sea and
They
die.
don't live for a long time.
No, the females have to live longer so that they can grow bigger, right?
Yeah.
So that they can have all the eggs. So that's why they live longer, they get bigger, because they have to lay all those eggs. And the boy eels, it doesn't take as much energy for them. So they only have to get not as big, and that's why they only live for 10 or 15 years. You got any other questions? I love eel questions. They're my favorite questions.
Ow.
All right, I'm gonna put this eel back in something that he can't jump out of, because like I said before, eels are very sneaky and very jumpy.
Wait, can we see the big tank?
No, because my computer is set up in here, and I have to have a cord that connects me to the internet. Otherwise, my computer won't work, and I can't bring it out.
Why?
The tanks. But I am at the Nori Point Environmental Center, and usually our site is open to the public. So you could come with your family and you can see all of our animals. Right now we're closed because of COVID, the same reason that like probably a lot of your schools are closed, or a lot of the libraries are closed, not letting people in, or only letting a couple people in at a time. So our building is closed right now, but hopefully by the winter or spring, fingers crossed, we'll be able to open up again. And we have lots of tanks of lots of different animals. We have a bunch of different fish. We have a bunch of different turtles. There's actually, I can turn my camera around, you guys can see. There's two turtles who have been watching me talk to you guys about eels this whole time. I don't know if you can see them.
I can see them.
There's two big tanks where I'm talking to you guys about eels, and they're sitting there watching me talk about them. So.
Wait, but can't you take a picture on your phone of the tank, and then you could show it to us?
I could, but then I would have to leave, and I have to stay here.
Mm.
Then the program would be over. That's a good idea, though. Good problem solving. We got any other eel questions? I have another eel book. This one's really good too. So I like that other eel book, but this one is for sure my favorite because it talks about some other animals that I also really, really love. So this book is called Bird, Butterfly, Eel. And we're going to talk about eels, right? Got eels in the title. But we're also going to talk about birds. We're going to talk about butterflies too, because all three of these kinds of animals do something really special in the fall that's called migration. So when
I know what migration is.
you guys know about migration? Great. So the silver eels, when they're swimming back to the Sargasso Sea, that's a migration. So they're going from one place to another place to do some part of their life. So what the eels are doing is they're swimming from the Hudson River to the Sargasso Sea to lay their eggs. That's what they're doing. That's a migration. And
Yeah, like
birds also migrate, right? A lot of times birds migrate somewhere south in the winter so that it's warmer. Where it's very, very cold. And then they'll come back up to us in the springtime. They come back and all the birds are singing in the spring, and that's their migration, is that they migrate south for the winter. Butterfly, like the monarch butterfly, also does the same thing. They migrate, they swim from not swim, butterflies don't swim. They fly from one area to another area, so that they can be in a warmer place, just like the bird. So this book is
Yeah,
really, really cool. And we're going to talk about what all three of these animals do in the fall, which is right now. All right, so this is called Bird, Butterfly, Eel. It's summer on the farm, and bird, butterfly, and eel are at home. Butterfly is a monarch. She lives in the meadow behind the pond. Have you guys ever seen a monarch butterfly?
Mm-hmm.
They're really beautiful, right? Eel lives in the dark, cool waters of the pond below the lily. Who's that?
I'm a frog.
Is
He's
that
about
your
to go up and
frog?
eat him. He's about to go up and eat him.
Probably, right? If she's hungry, she'll probably eat him. Bird lives in the barn at the end of the meadow. In nest she makes of mud and straw. In a nest she made of mud and straw. She loves being safe high up in the rafters, away from the barn cats. So this type of bird is called a swallow. Butterfly is laying her eggs on the milkweed plants in the meadow. Soon the eggs hatch and become caterpillars. They eat the milkweed and get strong enough to spin chrysalises and become butterflies.
Did you know that some birds, like if you build a house for some birds and some birds go to it, they can fly miles away from it and still know where their house is?
Exactly, that's part of their migration. And so they fly really far away in the south, and most of the time birds, when they come back, they go to the exact same place. So if you put out a birdhouse, you have a bird that makes a nest in it, and they fly south for the winter, right, to stay warm. When they fly back in the springtime to lay their eggs, they'll probably go right back into your birdhouse because that's a place that they know is safe, that they can lay their eggs and have their babies.
We built a birdhouse at
You
our
did? Very cool.
upstate.
So this is another life cycle, right? Talking about how she lays her eggs. That's similar to the eel, right? Eels have eggs. Lay their eggs, and they hatch into caterpillars. And then the caterpillars spin their chrysalis. There's the chrysalis right there. And then they become the butterfly. That's another life cycle. So you guys have 2 life cycles now. Eel has lived in the pond for many years. She is eating insects and small fish and storing up her energy for the long swimming journey ahead. There's another fish up there. That's a sunfish. Bird flies over the meadow, collecting insects to feed her babies in the barn. As summer turns to fall, birds young have left the nest and are flying over the pond and meadow, singing songs for Butterfly and Eel. Butterfly watches her young caterpillars turn into beautiful butterflies. Eel is full and strong and is ready for her long journey. There's our caterpillar spinning into a chrysalis. With the cool winds of autumn, bird, butterfly, and eel sense a change, feel restless, and know this means it's time to leave the farm. Bird gathers her babies and flies southwest over the barn and meadow, the pond, and follows the coast. Butterfly takes to the southerly winds, heading down over land and sea. Eel swims downstream and out to the ocean. At one point in their long journey, at the edge of the sea, bird, butterfly, and eel will meet one last time to say goodbye. There they see other animals on their own long journeys to very different places. And all of the creatures, striped bass, false albacore, common tern, bay anchovy, osprey, fishermen, go their separate ways. Bird will go 8,000 miles to the southern tip of Argentina to spend the winter in the golden meadows of Patagonia, which look very similar to the one she left on the farm.
Oh, but
Yep.
eels go farther than birds, right?
I think the bird goes further than the eel for this one because they're all starting up here, and then the eel makes it here, so she's swimming. She goes down here. The bird swims all along here, all the way down here, so the bird actually goes further.
Wait,
Butterfly will glide to the mountains of central Mexico, 3,000 miles away, and spend the winter in forests with millions of other butterflies. There are so many butterflies, they blanket the trees. Eel will swim down the creek, connecting the pond to the sea. From the coast, she'll travel 1,500 miles, that's 1,500 miles, to the Sargasso Sea, an eddy in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So they all start at the farm, and then the blue line is the eel. She makes it that far. And then one of these orange lines is the butterfly. She makes it that far. And the bird makes it all the way down here, really far away. So they all have really long journeys. It's warm and beautiful where bird, butterfly, and eel go. Back at the farm, the barn and the meadow are covered in snow, and the pond begins to freeze. It is cold, and the animals that live there miss bird, butterfly, and eel. As winter turns into spring on the farm, Bird flies home to her nest in the rafters of the barn where she was born, right? So we were talking about how birds will go back to the same place. This bird is doing exactly that. She's going right back to the place where she laid her eggs last time. Butterfly makes a long journey north again as spring turns into summer, her young taking her place in the meadow as flowers begin to bloom. And eel's young, small as toothpicks and clear as glass, swim up the creek to the pond. Here's our little glass eels. And the cycle begins again. There's our bird, butterfly, and eel all together. And that's the end. Which animal do you guys think you like the best out of bird, butterfly, and eel?
All of them.
All of them? They're all really good. That's true.
Eel.
So that's my last story. That's all I had for you guys today. If there are eel questions, I'm always happy to answer eel questions. But if not, I think that's the end of our program.
I have a question of eels.
Okay, we got a question over here.
Are there electric eels?
There are electric eels. That is a really good question. So there are electric eels, but we don't have them in the Hudson River. They only live in the Amazon. And a fun fact about them is that they're not even really eels. So to be an eel, you have to have a fin. Here's our eel. See his face? You have to have a fin that wraps around your whole body. See how it wraps around his tail? It has to wrap around your whole body. And electric eels, they have a fin. They have long fins too. They have a long fin on top and a long fin on the bottom, but it doesn't wrap around their tail. So we call them electric eels, but they're not even really eels. They're actually in a different family of fish. That's how scientists classify fish, is we put them in different families and call them different names. And the electric eel is actually in the knife fish family. And not doesn't make any sense.
Can an electric eel shock you?
They can't. That's how they catch their prey, actually. And it feels like if in the winter you're wearing really woolly socks, you like scuffle across the carpet and then you touch the door handle, something metal. It's called static electricity. It's just like, ooh, but it's not for a really long time. It doesn't really hurt. That's what the electric eels do. And so it wouldn't really affect a human, but if you're a really tiny fish that eel is trying to eat, it does shock them. And that's how they catch their food.
It's like the eel have electric powers.
Pretty much, yeah. But the eels that live in the Hudson River don't do that.
Okay.
They're not electric. That's a really good question, though. A lot of people get
All right, great. Well, Aidan, thank you.